I think it's about time for us to get started. Hello, everybody. I'm Julie Jones, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's Electrify Your Ride Week and National Solar Tour event, Electrify Your Ride to School. This event is one of many on the National Solar Tour, co-hosted by Generation 180 in partnership with Solar United Neighbors and the American Solar Energy Society. The largest grassroots renewable energy event in the nation is in its 25th year. And of course, this year it's virtual. I encourage you to check out the online open houses and explore the map to learn more. Today is Solar Schools Day on the tour. And this is the second of several sessions that we're hosting today, featuring stories about solar schools. We encourage you to join us again at 7 p.m. Eastern tonight for a discussion with students who have led the solar initiatives in their communities. Recordings of all of these solar school events will be available on the Generation 180 YouTube page early next week. This event is also one of 13 Electrify Your Ride Week events Generation 180 is hosting to celebrate National Drive Electric Week. Check out our other events for EV owners, EV advocates, and the EV curious alike. We're even giving away an electric bike to one lucky person who signs our Going Electric pledge, which you can find on our website. Before we jump into our main topic, I want to briefly introduce Generation 180. Generation 180 is a national nonprofit working to inspire and equip people to take action on clean energy. At Generation 180, there are three major focus areas of our work. We're working to flip the energy script, helping us move from a narrative focused on climate doom and gloom to a story focused on where we need to go, to a world powered by 100% clean energy, a story that says we can do this and we all have a role to play. We focus on individuals in their homes and communities because your energy matters. Because certain behaviors and technologies not only help fight climate change, but also help build the social momentum and political will we need to get big system-level changes. Our two major national campaigns focus on solar and electric vehicles. These are clean energy solutions that address the two largest sources of carbon dioxide emissions, electricity generation and transportation. We are leading a solar schools movement nationwide that will reduce energy costs, enhance student learning, and foster healthier communities for all. The Solar for All Schools campaign leverages the integral role K-12 schools can play in reaching students, parents, neighbors, and decision makers to encourage clean energy action throughout our communities. Likewise, we are leading the Electrify Your Ride campaign to accelerate electric vehicle adoption. The intersection of these two campaigns is the subject of our discussion today, electric school buses. So let's get started. A few quick housekeeping items before we dive in. Because of the large number of people joining us today, all event attendees will remain on mute throughout the event. Please use the Q&A, not the chat, to submit your questions. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can over the next hour. A big thanks to my team members helping to run this webinar behind the scenes. All right, and you all can see who's in the audience today. We've got a great group. Looks like a lot of parents joining us, but a lot of people from who are homeowners and from schools and the solar industry. Really glad to have you all here today. It's fantastic. To help us learn about electric school buses, we have three expert speakers. I'll briefly introduce them and then let them educate us. Joining us from Stockton Unified School District in California is Gilbert Rosas. As the energy education specialist, he oversees the energy conservation program, which has saved his district over $15 million in its first 7 years. His passion for empowering students to educate the staff and their community all about conservation, solar energy, and the uses of battery storage. Today, he'll tell us about how he's helping Stockton leverage grants and re-rate monies to reduce their carbon footprint and add electric buses to their transportation fleet. On the East Coast, we have Brian Foulds from Massachusets. Brian serves as chair of the Concord Climate Action Advisory Board in Concord and is the citizen activist who spearheaded Concord's electric school bus campaign. He helped secure the federal funding for a pilot programming bringing the first 3 electric school buses to Massachusetts. Thanks to him, Concord continues to lead the state in decarbonizing school bus fleets. Our final panelist and your discussion moderator today is Eleanor Fort from Dream Corps. As Deputy Director of the Green for All campaign, Eleanor leads clean transportation policy and advocacy work out of Boston, Massachusetts. She brings more than a decade of experience running campaigns to pass policies that build a sustainable and equitable future, and is an expert in clean transportation issues through an equity lens. I'm excited to turn it over to her now. Eleanor?
Great. Thank you so much, Julie, and to everyone who is joining us today. I know it is a busy back to school season, and it's certainly during a time when school looks different for everyone one way or another. But today we are going to talk to you a little bit about how to prepare school for the future by electrifying our rides to school with zero emission electric school buses. So again, my name is Eleanor Fort. I just want to thank Generation 180 and also Gilbert and Brian for joining us here today. We'll hear from them in just a minute about their stories bringing electric school buses to their communities. So Green for All is a program of the Dream Corps. You can go to the next slide. We work to build an inclusive green economy that is strong enough to lift people out of poverty. And so we work at the intersection of environmental, racial, and economic justice movements. We were founded by Van Jones a decade ago. So our goal is to make sure that people of color and low-income communities have a place and a voice in the climate movement, that our neighborhoods are strong, resilient, and healthy, and that as the clean economy grows, it brings jobs and good opportunities to our communities. Next slide. The Fuel Change campaign launched almost 2 years ago. Our goal is to bring clean cars, trucks, and buses to communities across the country, and particularly focusing on the communities that need them the most, those communities that are overburdened with transportation pollution and underserved with clean mobility options. And I just want to recognize that this work is, of course, through partnerships with many other organizations and leaders who are working with us on the same efforts to bring electric school buses to their communities, including Generation 180. So thanks to our partners as well. Next slide. So school buses, why work on electric school buses? 25 million children in the US ride a school bus on their way to get to an education. Of course, this number is before COVID, but we certainly hope that one day we will return to many, many children needing to physically go into school and needing a way to get from home to educational opportunities. And it's vast majority of school buses in the US are run on diesel. So about 90% of school buses are diesel buses. And children that ride on diesel school buses are exposed to 5 to 15 times more air pollution than the rest of the population. The air inside of a diesel school bus can actually be dirtier than the air outside of the school bus. And diesel pollution, of course, when you burn it, it's a fossil fuel, but it has particular air quality issues that impact human health and also impact human development. So particularly children are very susceptible to diesel pollution that has actually, some of the chemicals and toxins that are in diesel emissions have actually been linked to lower IQ and lower English test scores and behavioral problems in children. And children are breathing more air that is at a higher concentration for their little bodies. And so it's leading to all sorts of problems. Obviously, asthma is probably the leading problem. So childhood asthma, and 4.8 million children across the country suffer from childhood, or suffer from asthma as children. So this is why we want to electrify school buses. It's a massive issue. It impacts so many families and so many children. They're the most vulnerable among us breathing this dirty air, and they're being exposed to it at super high levels. So we can totally transition to zero emission electric school buses. And the good news is that the technology is there, and these buses are actually being deployed in communities across the country. So we're going to hear about buses in Stockton in the San Joaquin Valley in California, and Concord, Massachusetts. Before we do that, I want to quickly go through on the next slide. There are some barriers. So Green for All is a policy advocacy organization. Some of the barriers to getting electric vehicles into communities and electric school buses into schools, first of all, is the upfront purchase cost. This is not only for the vehicle, although costs are coming down, electric school buses do cost more than a new diesel bus. Secondly, there's the upfront cost of the infrastructure and the installation of charging infrastructure. We also need to make sure that we're retraining workers and fleet managers to make sure that these buses are maintained. Maintaining an electric bus is often cheaper and easier than maintaining a combustion vehicle. There's just less moving pieces. But we do need to make sure that workers are appropriately trained. And then one of the biggest barriers is just a lack of time and resources from school officials who want to bring these buses to their neighborhoods, but don't necessarily have the capacity to identify where there might be an opportunity to do so. So some of the solutions are incentives and rebates to bring the costs down. Some states have dedicated the VW settlement funds for these purposes. There is a federal bill called the Clean School Bus Act, which was introduced by Senator Kamala Harris, who is, of course, now running for vice president. And then there's also some creative utility financing or even utility battery ownership models that are happening in other communities. So I want to, before we dive, into that kind of touches on lots of the barriers and solutions, but I really want to pass it over to our panelists, and we're going to have Brian begin and tell us about his story bringing clean buses to Concord, Massachusetts.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me pull up my slides real quick and share my screen. All right, can you all see that?
Yeah, we can.
Great. So a little bit about me. I'm a parent. I have twin boys that are going through the school system currently. I was a stay-at-home parent, and as my kids have grown up, I've used my time to work on issues like this in making what is generally now called a green economy happen, which is just essentially the idea of doing what we always have done, but doing it without fossil fuels. And I apologize up front. I'm going to go rather quickly because I have a lot of slides and little time, but I'm more than happy to go back during the Q&A. So let's see if we can move to the next slide. All right, so what is the problem and why are we working on it? Climate change is really affecting our lives. It really enhances a lot of the problems that exist. And this relates back to health. We have many studies, I link here to a military study about it's a multiplier for problems in the world, but it's also linked to many of the health issues that Eleanor explained earlier. And essentially it comes down to a chemistry problem. We are burning fossil fuels and putting them into the air. If we simply reduce that, we can get rid of these problems. And again, I'm going to go quickly, but Concord's strategy as a town, we've worked for quite a while to reduce our carbon emissions, and through many efforts over 8 years, from 2008 to 2016, we really only had progress of reducing our emissions by about 6%. and electrification, where we clean up our emissions from electricity and then switch our fuel burning emissions, which is mostly heating in spaces and transportation, over to electricity, we can have a dramatic impact on the community's emissions. So you can see here in this chart, that could be a 60% reduction in emissions. So and it allows us to live our lives as we currently do and do the things we want to do every day, which is something we like to do. And getting down into the buses, we had, in 2015, we did a study. We had 36 diesel buses at the time. That fleet was burning about 100,000 gallons of diesel fuel every year. And that equated to 8% of all town emissions. And that includes heating of buildings, lighting, driving all the vehicles around town. 8% was just our fleet of 36 buses. So going after buses as the first thing to be electrified is a very valuable thing. And it's a simple idea. Here's a 7-year-old that lives in town that worked with his father to put a solar panel on the back of his little motorized four-wheeler there, and modified it to run off the sun. It's a simple concept. We should all be doing it. It's a great idea. But making that simple idea go through the government process is complex in the fact that it takes time, persistence, and working with many people over a long time to answer everyone's questions and to make sure the whole community is ready to move forward. This is a timeline of what we went through in Concord. And you can see it spans from 2012 till now, and we're continuing to move forward. So in 2016, we received the first electric school bus and drove it as a pilot to see how electric school buses would work. We found it worked quite well. We did have some teething issues. There's a report that's linked in the slide as well as a video. And you can hear about our teething issues of getting, little mechanical issues and things that happened along the way. I'm happy to report that the last year and a half, the bus has really run as expected without many maintenance issues at all. So we're quite happy with it today. And I want to talk about this change in thinking, because going from diesel to electricity, you're changing your fuel supplier. So you really do want to partner with your electric utility. This is the construction in 2017 of our depot. And you can see behind it in that picture is our 5.5 megawatt solar array. So this is what will be fueling the fleet for the electric school buses. It is something that, solar is intermittent. Solar doesn't shine at night, but we do consume electricity throughout the day. So we need something to store that energy and share it back with the grid when it's needed. And that's where this concept of vehicle to grid comes in, because this can be a big revenue source for school districts and a big cost savings to utilities. And this slide here kind of shows you a life in the day of a battery in a school bus. Down the bottom, you can see the green and the red. That shows when the school bus is plugged in and when it's not. And then that yellow line shows the discharge of the state of charge of that battery pack. You can see at 2 to 3, it's charging, and then it's doing its school runs as it drives kids around. It stops in at the depot, it gets a little bit of a charge, and then it discharges almost all of it into the grid for that evening peak, which is the load at our substation, that orange line. So it really, the duty cycle of a school bus in particular has a great match to the grid's demand for electricity. And here's a total cost of ownership that I made. These are all, there's a disclaimer at the bottom because people can really drill into these numbers. There's a lot of things that can adjust these numbers, but generally this is what you're looking at. You're looking at having a purchase price of about 3.5 times the purchase price of a diesel bus. So at the beginning, they're very expensive. But if you see that first column, when you get down to 12 years of operating the diesel bus, it costs the school district about $320,000 to operate that diesel bus over the 12-year life. Where if you get an electric school bus without any incentives, it would cost $500,000. So the life cycle cost is higher without any incentives. But if you get a Volkswagen incentive, or if you get something to lower that purchase price, the life cycle cost of that vehicle, just running it as electric without doing any grid services, can really make that life cycle cost cheaper. You can see that 64% compared to the 100% for the diesel. When you add in that partnership with the utility, you can really earn revenue, which is something a diesel bus can't do while it's sitting idle, and that can really lower the life cycle cost. So that's where that 18% comes in. And this is a similar slide, just 2 buses instead of 1 bus, and some differences about dispensers, but I just left it in there because it has some other information if people are curious. And so the strategy for Concord is that we want to get to an 80% electric fleet. We want to not pay full price, because we know that if we don't pay full price and we get some kind of incentive to keep it below the first time cost of a diesel, that the lower fueling, the lower maintenance, and the grid services will make that vehicle a net positive financially for the school district. And yeah, partnership with the utility. You can see here that we're using very different funding sources. So the first round, the first bus we got through a one-time pilot project. The second bus we're getting through Volkswagen funding. There's Massachusetts Chapter 171, which is a school district funding mechanism that we can use. And we're doing that for 2 more, and then we'll continue with Volkswagen funding. And hopefully we'll have some other funding mechanisms that will come up over time, or we'll have so many electric buses in the marketplace, and it will become so competitive that prices for that first purchase will start to come down. And that's the end goal, because then you don't need any incentive, and it's just simply the better choice. And then I have a few slides here. The Juliet is from Thomas. The Bluebird has their All-American, and Lion has their Type C and D. But I just want to make sure people know that these are full-size buses. These aren't little examples or Type A and small machines that we're talking about. And that was me going through some slides very quickly. So I hope the Q&A, I can clarify any questions people have. And Eleanor, I think back to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian, and congrats again for all of your great work in Concord. As somebody who is joining this webinar from Dorchester, Massachusetts, it's great to see these buses working in communities right here in the Bay State. And now we're going to go to the opposite coast. We have Gilbert Rosas joining us. He is the energy manager for the Stockton Unified School District. So Gilbert, take it away. You may be muted, Gilbert.
Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
My name is Gilbert, and I serve as the energy manager for Stockton Unified School District. I'm excited to share our story about zero-emission buses and adding them to our fleet. We're located in Central California. By enrollment, SUSD is the 17th largest school district in the California. And I just want to point out the picture on the left is actually our student energy patrol. That's from one of our videos that we did. Next slide. Stockton was established in 1852. And as you can see by the chart, we have 54 schools. We've got approximately 40,000 culturally diverse students, and we have a $585 million budget. At a closer look, you'll see that 82% of the student population are considered high poverty and identified as disadvantaged communities. Because utility costs, electricity, natural gas, and water are a significant portion of our non-teaching budget, our school board passed an energy policy, AR 3511, in 2010. And it demonstrates our willingness to reduce our carbon footprint, to save energy, and to use as much of our resources towards better education for the students. Next slide. I was hired in 2012 to start an energy conservation program that was mainly behavior modification. And as you can see by the slide, we've been successful. We are on course to save $22 million in 10 years. But besides energy conservation, we've installed 2 phases of solar through power purchase agreements. So 31 of our 54 schools have solar installed. So that's almost 60%. And in addition to the solar, we've added a 250 kW and 500 kW battery storage system at 2 of the largest high schools. That will help us save energy and also reduce our peak demand costs. Next slide. This grant application that's shown on the left is what drove our EV fleet program forward. In October of last year, we partnered with CTE, Center for the Transportation and the Environment, and Schneider Electric to apply for a Clean Mobility in the Schools pilot project. This was a grant through the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. After 8 days of intense preparation, we submitted our proposal, which was called Getting Stockton Schools to Zero Emissions, Clean Air for Our Community. On December 20th, we heard back that we were awarded $4.9 million. After a few board resolutions and a couple subcontracts later, we're off and running to get this project built. Our kickoff meeting was June 21st of this year, and we expect to start trenching our transportation yard the week of October 12th, so a week from Monday. We expect bus delivery by March of next year. Next slide. So these are all the plates that we're spinning. These are all the funding sources and grants and rebates. Through CARB, we'll get all the utility upgrades for a new charging infrastructure at our transportation yard, 4 zero emission electric buses, some battery powered riding lawnmowers, battery powered electric gators, and battery powered electric landscaping tools like hedgers and trimmers. We're also going to do community outreach and student education programs with this grant funds. For the California Energy Commission, or CEC, we will receive 2 buses and $120,000 in upgrades for our infrastructure money. For the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, we'll receive 5 electric buses. We also have a self-generation incentive program. It's from the California Public Utilities Commission, and it's the SGIP program, which provides incentives to support a number of things like our battery storage that we're looking to do. PG&E is our local utility, and they offered a discounted fleet program rate, as well as rebates for our infrastructure and for the charging station. Next slide, please. There's a lot of details of what we spend things on, and we've broken them out in budgets, but the most important one for me is Task G, where it shows our matching funds. So we're putting together almost $9 million, and there's 0 matching funds from our district. That's been a huge advantage. It's critical because we've experienced shortfalls like a lot of districts in California, and we needed to cut things from the budget, yet we're still able to push this project forward. Next slide. And as you can see by a lot of the details on it, just all the things that we have, that there's a lot of considerations when you're building stuff. What are the specific requirements of each grant that you apply for? Do you have someone on staff with experience to administer or manage the project? Will the programs run individually or concurrently? What are the short-term and long-term goals for your electric bus fleet? And then realize that bus quotes are only good for a specific time, and that, depending on how long it takes for you to plan and implement your project, that you may need to account for price increases. And time is money. So the longer it takes you to get your design finished and your construction started, the more costs will go up unless you have money to afford to spend on. And so for some of you, that's an extremely important point to understand and realize. Next slide, please. There's a lot of infrastructure details and considerations that have to go before your bus acquisitions. Buses can't run without the charging system, as you guys pointed out. A site inspection with a variety of experienced contractors has to be made. We had 3 independent sources of bus acquisition, but none of them could be realized until we finished all the infrastructure. Next slide. Stockton Unified is officially adding 0 emissions and lowering greenhouse gases to its fundamental goals. It's very exciting because in these financially tough times, we're going to complete the utility upgrades that will allow us to realize the dream and have a charging station for up to 24 electric buses at Stockton Unified. This is definitely the pinnacle for my career, and it's a legacy project that I will always remember. I'm very passionate about our students and the community, And I not only understand the demographics, but I look like our demographics and grew up in very similar surroundings. It's important that students have role models that they can demonstrate, positive career choices. And I want our students to have green career choices that help our country. Next slide, please. No matter who you are, next slide, or what entity you get funding sources from, at some point you'll have to report back your success. And at Stockton Unified, we know that students are the reason for all of these efforts. And we realize that in order to help them be successful, that they are our best spokespersons that we have. Just like the Energy Patrol shared our energy conservation success, the Energy Patrol will outline our zero emissions, our electric fleet, and our greenhouse gas reduction strategies. We will produce and deliver 2 more videos on our district website in the very near future. And these strategies will all reimburse everything for our mission at Stockton Unified. It's to graduate every student college, career, and community ready. In doing so, we lift them out of the circumstances of poverty and scarcity. So we're building hashtag Stockton Strong. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to thank you all for watching. This is our website and my contact information. So please watch our Energy Patrol videos and check out what we're doing, and we'll give you results as the buses come in. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Gilbert. So we're going to do about 10 or 15 minutes of moderated discussion, and then we will take some questions from the audience. So just a quick reminder to submit questions via the Q&A. We're also seeing a couple questions come into the chat. But before I dive in, Brian, I saw on the poll that we do have a lot of parents joining this today. And so I'm curious about how your role as a parent kind of shaped this work, and what advice you would have for other parents, especially when they are not, in the decision-making bodies themselves, not working for the school districts, et cetera. So what can parents do?
Oh, so much. So I have not found anyone who works for the town or is a stakeholder that doesn't listen to the people they serve. They are trying to balance so many things. So the best thing to do is talk with them, learn about the topic, express your desire for electric school buses, and ask them to express their concerns or what barriers they see, and then work with them to see if you can't help solve those issues. Many times, if you pick a goal in the horizon, we want to get an electric school bus piloted in our school district, and you present this idea, the first reaction will be, oh, they're 3 times, 4 times more expensive on a first purchase cost than other buses. Oh, we've got to build infrastructure, meaning we have to put in a charger at the depot. These are all things that can be worked out. This is where you present the idea, they present their concerns, and you help them solve those concerns, and they'll come up with new concerns, and you repeat and repeat. And in the end, you get a bus. And be polite, because they are working hard to help you, but they're also listening to many other people talk about many other topics. So it's difficult.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we identified a key barrier just as the time and capacity of school officials and those who are fleet managers for the school districts to spend the time thinking about this. And I just wanted to highlight that, now is a good time for school districts to be hearing from parents, students, and community members about the importance of wanting to, when they do come back to school and when they are back on those buses, especially for schools that are not having in-person teaching these days, that it would be great to work towards that goal to continue to protect children's health, especially as they're being on a cleaner bus when they come back.
And starting the discussions now, because there'll be lots of questions about planning. And so if you present the idea today saying we should put an electric school bus into our fleet, and you hear from stakeholders, well, we're dealing with COVID right now. We don't have to do that for a while. You can say, well, it's going to take a lot of planning to get there. So let's start the planning process, and we'll think about implementing in 1 to 2 years.
Right. And Gilbert, you are somebody who has gone through that exercise of planning, but pretty quickly. You had to kind of cobble together a lot of different resources and incentive programs. Talk to us a little bit about that work to kind of try to find missing pieces and pull them all together. And what was that process like?
Well, a lot of it that was very important was that we had good partners. We worked with Schneider Electric, who helped us on Prop 39 incentives and programs before, so we had a contractor that we're used to working with. He also pulled in some experts, CTE, Center for Transportation and the Environment, and Sage Renewables, and the Mobility House. And there, you need all that kind of bandwidth, that expertise, and those people in your court to do it. Luckily, we got a CEC grant in 2019 earlier for a little bit of infrastructure on a couple buses, but that didn't do any good, so we applied for the CARB grant. But it also allowed us to have 50% of our design figured out ahead of time. We've already done, like they were saying, the homework of investigating the site, having people look at it, and being ready as soon as that money became available. You know, I think that developing green energy sources, you know, for reductions of emissions and all that, it's not a spectator sport. We have to get involved. And even though there aren't the programs like California has, we're hoping to show our progress and our example that can be a testimony for other states and other communities. You know, Colin Powell said that there are no secrets to success. It's the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. And Zig Ziglar just said, expect the best, prepare for the worst, and capitalize on what comes. So we hit the deck running. And since March, when we signed everything, we're breaking ground in October, and we'll have buses in March. Now, you're right, there's a lot of plates spinning, and they're all very important, and the coordination is a lot of pressure. But we're ready, and we're waiting, and we're willing, and we're working for kids. I described it like being a single mom at the cash register. You know, this is my turn up at bat. I'm going to use every coupon and rebate that we can find, and it's my kids that I'm worried about feeding. So it's really an important job. So I challenge everybody to try to take up that baton and figure out how they can make it work in their own communities.
Yeah, so now's the time to do the planning and the homework so that when there is money on the table, you're ready to submit that proposal and get that rebate.
Well, and the other thing is, if you don't sacrifice for what you want becomes the sacrifice. So you do have to plan ahead, definitely.
Wise words. So Gilbert, I want to stick with you for just another minute or two. Tell us a little bit about your community, the San Joaquin Valley. You talked a little bit about how there were high poverty levels, how California has designated it as a disadvantaged community. I know that a lot of folks look at electric vehicles and see that they're for a privileged class. But clearly there's such a big need in communities like yours. And you talked not just about that, but also about the workforce development that your students will hopefully one day have future careers in clean solutions. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of making sure that these solutions are reaching those communities that need it the most.
Well, I think it is important because I think we have to be the tip of the spear and kind of show that once we got a chance up at bat, we've made the most of it. You know, for example, we have to retrain the mechanics. Well, this is my idea. Why not do that at Weber Technical Institute where we teach automotive? Why not hold it there and have a few more classes with the funds that are available to train students and have them have a certificate before they get out of high school that will put them way ahead of people going into either automotive industries or whatever. You can't set the bar too high for them. You have to, you know, I was doing energy conservation before, and if I tell teachers to keep their doors closed because the air conditioning's on, they kind of look at you funny. But if an energy patrol kid in a little yellow smock and a green hat says to keep your doors closed, they want to help out. And so it's effective. I think it's teaching the kids and showing them. If we get one student a scholarship towards broadcasting or towards mechanical engineering, these are the kind of things that we can do and help. And I think it's our responsibility to look for those opportunities and make it happen.
Yeah. So last kind of question and takeaway, and I'm going to throw this to both of you. Maybe we'll ask Brian to start. Both of your programs also have solar, and there is a vehicle to grid integration. I saw a question about this in the chat as well. Tell us a little bit about how you have leveraged the electric school buses as battery capacity and the integration of solar so that they're truly zero emission.
Well, we're the vehicle to grid is just starting here, so we haven't kicked that off yet. But the utility, because Concord is unique in the fact that we have our own municipal light plant, so we have our own electric utility that serves Concord. It gives us a great advantage because the people who are ratepayers to the utility and the people who are tax property owner pay their property taxes are the same group of people, which means that when we have taxpayers fund some infrastructure and then rates go lower because of vehicle to grid services, we have the same group of people and there isn't that separation. So with vehicle to grid, the grid has certain peak hours, transmission peaks, and a summer peak event. And they tend to happen in the evenings for the transmission peaks, and it happens over the summer for that when everybody's running the air conditioners. And those particular hours can be very expensive, like $200 a kilowatt in that summer peak in New England. So if the bus pushes 60 kilowatts back to the grid, that's 60 times $200 for that 1 hour of work. It's very valuable to the utility to reduce those costs and to also not use those peaker plants, those diesel generators, those oil and natural gas fired generators to generate that electricity. Also, Concord Light has committed to carbon neutral electricity as part of our town's goals. So the buses are fueled with wind and solar and hydro, and thus we're putting that into those peaks, doing that vehicle to grid service. Does that kind of answer that?
I know that was a wonky question right before we took it to the audience. Gilbert, did you want to add anything?
No, vehicle to grid is part of what we're looking at for our program. It's part of the CARB grant, but it's also something that has a cost associated with it. And how much utility are you really going to get out of it? We're amazed that we're able to explore those things and see what we have at the end, but we're just excited to go from 1 year 0 to the next March having 11 buses that are actively done with 14 chargers or 24 chargers, and having that infrastructure and being able to get those buses. The sooner we can do that, the sooner we'll reduce the emissions and be able to replace our fleet. Vehicle to grid is an option that we're definitely looking at, along with battery storage and all the other capabilities. But we're really proud of what we've gotten done so far, and we'll definitely explore all the options we can.
Great. So I think that we'll ask Julie to give us some questions from the audience, and hopefully we can go through these pretty quickly because I know we've got a bunch.
Fantastic. You guys are so inspiring. Thank you so much for your comments so far. Some questions from the audience. Definitely getting quite a few questions about battery range, charging along the line, en route, and other charging. So if you guys could just give us a real quick overview of how your charging works and what your range on your buses is like, and any red flags or things that people should be thinking about when it comes to charging and range.
Yeah, so Concord has, the first bus that we received had a 75-mile range. That sounds very small, but we actually run that bus pretty close to its full range on Tuesdays. So it can do a little over 75 miles in a day because we do a little top-up charge in the afternoon at the depot. So it goes out in its morning run, does about 45 miles, comes back for its evening run, and does about 36 or 37 miles, I believe. And you know, in that interim where they're doing a lunch break, they get a little top-up at the charge, and that's only on Tuesdays. The other days of the week, it was doing a normal run where it would charge at night and then charge. It wouldn't have that top-up charge midday. And we're in a cold climate. So we have an auxiliary diesel heater for that bus. We're getting another bus. We just put in the order this week. It's not going to have the auxiliary heater, but it's going to have a larger battery pack so that we can use that instead. So there is range loss in cold climates, but the packs now are so much larger. I mean, the bus that we got, the first one was 75 miles of range. This next one will be 155 miles of range. So we can easily get that, 75, 80 miles a day on those big long days in a cold snap, and have range loss, but still be able to easily perform the run.
And from our end, we've used the buses. We have anywhere from 82 to 96 buses. And so we've looked at which routes would give us the most amount of coverage. And we also have AC chargers as well as level 3 DC chargers. So again, we take all that into account, and we try to, our goal is to try to keep them on the road as much as we can and being able to get a fast charger if they come back to the yard. And then also just going on the summer months or whatever we can. But the total, the goal is to use it as much as possible and to increase the numbers as much as we can.
Great, thank you. Eleanor, some questions coming in for you. If you could talk a little bit more about some of the comments you made at the beginning around pollution levels inside of buses. I'm curious if that's, those numbers might have changed recently as diesel has gotten a little bit cleaner and there's been more.
Yeah, so definitely the oldest buses are going to be the dirtiest buses. And we want to prioritize a lot of the approach that Green for All takes is prioritizing these funds into the communities and the school districts that have the oldest school buses first, because those are going to be the dirtiest buses. Newer diesel buses are cleaner from a public health perspective. They do have much better emission controls now. And of course, they're not coming with the high cost of a battery electric bus today. That said, battery electric bus costs are coming, battery costs are coming down rapidly. And I think one of the keys here is that, buses are going to stay on the roads and in fleets and in operations for 10 to 12, sometimes more years. So the question isn't necessarily, what do you want in your fleet today? It's what do you want in your fleet in 2032? And will it make sense to be continuing to fuel a bus with diesel in 2032, even if the air quality is better? We also think that the lifetime savings over the course of the bus, these battery buses are cheaper to fuel and cheaper to maintain, and can actually, through vehicle to grid integration, be really helping this, be actually making money for the school. And this is one of the reasons why utilities see a real value in using the bus battery packs as part of storage on the grid to manage renewables, so that they, and one of the reasons why utilities often also offer incentive programs and financing for charging stations and installation and buses, is because they see a value in this. So while the newer diesel buses are going to be cleaner in terms of air quality inside the school bus for children, we still think that it makes the most sense to start adopting this technology today, and certainly start doing your homework for planning in terms of what is it going to take for your school and your community to go to a zero emission bus.
Brian,
Yeah,
did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, just a little bit. So when it comes to the life cycle of the bus, we tend to think of that as a standard unit of time. But in New England, we have salt on our roads in the winter, and that really eats through the battery box or the footwell, and that's what really kills our buses here. So they can live 10, 12, in a good scenario, 15 years. But you go to Arizona, and those buses can last 30 years. They're still on the road for decades. It's because they don't have those rust issues. So it's thinking, I kind of like, if you think of a third world country and phones, Electric buses are like mobile phones when they went to a third world country. It was a leap from the telecommunications that we had in the US. We've gone from, you know, the old box on the wall to, you know, the corded phones that we had in the 80s to all of these centralized systems that are very complex to run. But then the mobile phone came out and other people were able to jump ahead. I think of electric buses as that leap ahead. Stop trying to get that extra little bit of efficiency out of diesel. Just get rid of diesel and get rid of all the emissions that are coming out of it and go right to electric, because it is the end solution. We do have to get our emissions down to zero, and you can't do that when you're still digging fossil fuels out of the ground and putting them into a vehicle and into the air. So it's just, in order for us to deal with climate change, we really can't do incremental improvements of efficiency with diesel anymore. I think we've really done a lot of efficiencies. I think it's time to jump ahead.
Awesome, thanks, Brian. As you all know, and as most of our discussion has been today, is around how to pay for buses. A couple of questions coming in and comments about financing. First, want to thank folks in the audience who've been making us aware of some financing opportunities. The EPA today has announced a rebate program for clean school buses. It opens today and it closes on October 30th. But we'll pop that into the chat so you all can access that resource. And then another attendee today wanted to let us know that New York has a truck voucher incentive program that can help pay for buses as well. And a question, in California, there's a ton of ways you've had to balance spin a lot of plates, as you said, to pull them all together, but it's possible. In a lot of states, we just don't have that many sources. Curious, as you all have solar and many schools do, they've used something called power purchase agreements often, yes, which is a third party to help get their solar going. Is there any such financing mechanisms for EV buses?
Yes. There's a startup company, I'm going to put it in the chat, called Highland Electric. And that is their business model, is essentially trying to keep it such the school district pays the same amount that they would pay for a diesel bus, but they do the vehicle to grid services to lower the prices. So they do the agreements with the utilities. So they're kind of that middle person. They can provide you that electric bus at the same cost that a diesel would be. And the way that they do that is they partner with the utilities and do the vehicle to grid and gather that revenue. Yeah,
there are a number of creative financing solutions that are either being developed through policy or with utility programs. Another model is a pay-as-you-save model. So the utility offers the initial upfront additional cost of the bus. And then as the school district saves money on fuel, they pay incrementally back on their utility bill until that upfront vehicle is paid, that upfront loan is paid off. And the school district still ends up saving money because driving on electricity is just cheaper than driving on diesel. And then there's also something in Virginia. Dominion Energy has actually purchased electric school buses for a bunch of many school districts in Virginia, and then has owned the battery, maintains ownership over the battery of the vehicle so that they can use it with for storage on the grid. So that's another creative opportunity to try to engage utilities around this. And yes, many states have state rebates incentive programs. I know many states, and California has $94 million that it's offering through rebates that Gilbert's taken advantage of. And I know that other states are looking at that California model and trying to figure out how do they get programs like that happening in their states. So definitely, you know, working on policy advocacy is one of the key solutions that we're going to have to do to overcome some of these barriers.
And I would say that if your local state does not have some kind of incentive, mention it to your representatives. They need to hear that people want these kind of things, because they love to cut ribbons, especially when they are surrounded by a bunch of kids that are happy. It's politicians like that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Agreed. And certainly that's something that Eleanor and her group works on, and you can turn to them as a resource for policy ideas and funding ideas that you might be able to spread in your communities. Generation 180 as well collects those resources, so you can continue to find them on our website. Eleanor, do you we only have a couple minutes left. We could talk all day. You guys are so fascinating. I could drill you with questions, but I won't. As we only have a few minutes left, Eleanor, I'll turn it over to you for some wrap up with our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So I just want to really quickly talk about how you can get involved in your community to bring electric school buses to your school district. We have a community action toolkit, and their link is going to be dropped in the chat. So click the link in the chat to fill out your contact information, and it will email you a download of this toolkit. Next slide. Very briefly, so this toolkit is filled with a bunch of resources. It has sign-up sheets and educational information for how you can build support in your community with students and parents and teachers. It walks you through the steps of identifying who in your school is the decision maker for pursuing electric buses. And it has a worksheet that you're going to do. This is the homework that Gilbert is sending you home with. So parents take notes, students take notes. This is your homework, is filling out this worksheet with things like, how many buses, what is the route, how long is the route, what are the periods of day that the buses are sitting that could be charged. You're going to identify the barriers and the solutions being the policy solutions and all of those state, utility, and other rebates and funding opportunities for you. And then you're going to get your proposals shovel ready so that when the money comes, you are ready for it, and your school administrator is able to submit that that proposal and get funding for your school to go to a zero emission bus. And then finally, step 6, and this is exactly to Brian's point, you need to continue to advocate for policies that can fuel change and bring more of these creative financing, more funding, more worker retraining programs, and more student engagement and community engagement programs to your communities. And so much of that is driven by policy, that talking to your state representative, talking to your US Senator about supporting the Clean School Bus Act, and talking to other decision makers about how you want to bring electric school buses to your community is going to be really critical. So again, I think final slide for me, I hope, is click this link in the chat, Eleanor's toolkit, and it will let you send you an email with a download for this toolkit that has all sorts of worksheets and resources and more talking points and cool graphics you can share on social media and everything to get you going.
Thanks, Eleanor. And before we let you all go, just to let you know, Generation 180 also has a lot of resources available on our website to help you advocate for clean energy in your community, including Dream for All's and Green for All's, Dream Corps' Green for All electric school bus toolkit. You can find that resource as well as our Solar for All Schools resources, including our campaign toolkit and our solar census Brighter Futures report, and a financing guide on how to go solar on your school at solarforallschools.org. You can send any questions you might have to solarschools@generation180.org. A huge thank you to our panelists today and to Eleanor for moderating our discussion. And an even bigger thank you to all of you all in the audience today. We are so excited to have you here, and so many of you shared many great resources. Thanks for the work you're doing in your communities. As we mentioned, there's some pretty awesome panels and sessions happening this week. Do check us out this evening at 7 o'clock Eastern Time or 4 p.m. Pacific Time for a panel with students who've been leading the charge for solar at their schools. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.